Hey everybody, happy Sunday for those of you who watch the Super Bowl. Happy Super Bowl Sunday. Many of you know I did the big NFL study when the NFL was sort of struggling with traumatic brain injury and football, but I just saw so much pain in retired players' families that I knew I had to do something. But we're not talking football tonight. It's not a big topic for us. We're going to talk about grief and loss. And I know they're feeling it in Kansas City, but quite frankly, people are feeling it all around the world. And our older population, some of you think I'm in that group. No. Our older population is suffering more than I can remember them ever suffering because of the isolation and the loneliness. And the younger population is suffering more than ever. In my house, I have an 11-year-old, almost 16-year-old, and a 17-year-old. And last year, this year, they've lost a lot. And it's critical to know how to deal with it. I was on Headline News today, CNN Headline News. That was really fun with my friend Lynn Smith. We were talking about my new book, Your Brain is Always Listening. It is coming out March 2nd. And in the book, I talk about what your brain is always listening to. And I use the metaphor of dragons. The first section is dragons from the past that still breathe fire on your emotional brain. And we've talked about a herd of dragons so far. But tonight we're going to talk about the one that just bites people so often, and that is the grief and loss dragon. All the dragons, I had an artist render them for me. And it's more complicated than most people think. I mean, yes, when I lost my dad last May, partly because of COVID, there was just such sadness associated with that. And that's what people often think when they think of grief, that you lose a spouse or a parent or a child or a loved one. But there are three big categories to grief. You lose someone important, like death, or a separation, or a divorce, or a breakup, or a friend, or a peer group, a partner that has dementia, they don't recognize you anymore. You lose children. Now, the worst thing is losing a child to death. But when you have an empty nest, that's a loss. And so many patients that I've treated over the years, they actually can get depressed when they experience that loss. And TAME, my wife, is just a great mother. She has been a great mother. And one of the reasons I think she's great is she caused Chloe to be very independent. And she doesn't need her as much at 17. And that's sort of the point. That's what you want to do. But I could just see the sadness and the grief. you might lose something important. So the first category is someone important. The second one is something important, such as your health. So women with breast cancer who've had a mastectomy. I was an Army psychiatrist for a long time. If someone lost a limb, a job, finances, even a beloved pet. I have seen severe grief reactions, and it's like, well, why? It's like my dog Aslan loves me virtually no matter what. I can't say that about anybody else in my life. And so having that kind of love and attachment is so important. So someone important, something important, or you lose the attachment to an idea, to what could have been, to your identity, such as with retirement, or you lose a loved one to an addiction, or if you have a handicapped child, that you had this hope for your relationship with this child, and it just takes a complete right turn. I also see this a lot with the athletes and musicians and actors and actresses that I've seen, that they lose the trajectory of going toward a goal. And if they don't make new goals, they often get lost in themselves. And what can trigger grief and loss? Any reminder of the loss. A sight, a song, a routine, making coffee in the morning, an anniversary, anything. Today's Sunday. Sundays often trigger loss for me because for the last 5 years, virtually every Sunday, I went over to my dad's house and he and I worked out together. We lift weights. And he was almost 91 when he died. He could do a plank longer than I could. It was irritating. I mean, seriously irritating. I'd like go, let's do a minute. And he'd go, let's do 2. I'm like, okay. He goes, let's do 4. And I'm like, oh no. He could do a 6-minute plank at 90. It's pretty weird, actually. But every Sunday, or every time I do a plank, I think of him. And early on, it was a lot of pain for me. And so how do we react when we experience grief and loss, or when the grief and loss dragon breathes fire on our emotional brain? Well, it can be shock, anger, sadness, guilt, numbness, anxiety, insomnia. I remember when I lost someone, was about 16 years ago. I mean, someone I really cared about. And she went away. And for like 6 months, I was completely not normal. Probably most people know me and go, well, he's sort of never normal. But I wasn't myself. I couldn't sleep. I had chest pain and diarrhea. It was just like my whole nervous system was out of whack. And that's how people react. It's like your brain is still looking for something that's not there. Loneliness, physical stress symptoms, and chest pain is very important to get assessed. So I had chest pain when I went through that period of grief. And I went to the cardiologist and my heart was just fine. What happens with grief, it's a different kind of stress that causes your ventricles, one of the chambers of your heart, two of the chambers of your heart, to beat erratically. And that's what causes the chest pain. But my heart was fine. My assistant, who I adore, Kim, while she's working with me, her fiance died of a heart attack in her arms. And she had crushing chest pain. And my first thought was, it's grief. But the first thing I said is, it's probably grief. You need to go to the cardiologist. Well, we actually found out she had 95% blockages in her coronary arteries. His death likely saved her life. And so if you get chest pain, it's really important to get it assessed. And the chronic exposure to cortisol, stress hormones, actually shrinks the cells in your hippocampus, one of the major memory structures of the brain. And so having memory problems during periods of grief and loss are very common. So what to do? How to tame the grief and loss dragon? Let's talk about 7 things. 1, you want to start healing as soon as possible. I knew when my dad died, I wasn't just going to feel bad for a long time. I was going to feel bad. In fact, I sat, this is in my office, in the chair I write in, and I just played his voicemails. And I played them over and over again. I wanted to feel how much I loved him, how much he loved me, the sadness. I wrote him for his funeral. I wrote a poem that's actually, I put it in the book. I won't go over with you, but it's beautiful. Get the book. So start as soon as possible, number 1. Number 2, brain health, right? I'm already talking to you about how stress chemicals can damage your brain. You need to get on a brain healthy program. Too often people are feeling bad. They're smoking pot, they're drinking alcohol, they're eating a lot of sugar. They're doing things to medicate themselves that actually make them worse and perpetuate the problem. And I sent a note to my team today about Tom Brady. So, Tom Brady, greatest of all time, quarterback, 10th Super Bowl, just won his 7th Super Bowl or something crazy. I'm not a fan of football, but I'm a huge fan of Tom Brady. Because if you actually look at his routine, the New York Post did a headline story of his insane routine. He's basically a brain warrior. He does everything right except football. And that's why, despite being 43, he is still the best quarterback in football. I mean, it's crazy, right? So if you're going to be in a stressful environment, step number 2 is get your brain right. Do the things. Focus on exercising, eating right, taking your supplements, new learning. Do not give yourself permission to get off track. I have a great story that I put in one of my books, Use Your Brain to Change Your Age, about Chris, who lost her 12-year-old daughter, Sammy, to bone cancer, and then just felt terrible and got depressed, started drinking too much, ate the wrong food, went from 130 pounds to 200 pounds, And on the 2-year anniversary of Sammy's death, she was going to kill herself. And then she saw me on TV, and I was talking about brain health, and she said, well, I'll get his book, and if it's a bad book, I'll kill myself tomorrow. She actually told me that. It just horrified me. And but she realized she was doing all the wrong things. So she stopped drinking, she stopped eating bad food, she got on her tennis shoes, she started walking, then she started running, and over the next year got down to her normal weight, felt better. Of course she's always going to miss Sammy. Of course I'm always going to miss my dad. But hurting myself isn't helping anybody. Step 3, fix sleep first. So important. If you don't sleep right, you won't grieve right. If you don't sleep right, you won't think right. If you don't sleep right, you won't make the right decisions. And really take some time and focus on getting the sleep you need. And that does not mean Ambien. That is not a good strategy. Hypnosis, meditation. BrainMD makes something called Put Me to Sleep. We also have restful sleep. There are supplements that can help: magnesium, theanine, GABA, a little bit of melatonin, not a lot, a little bit of melatonin. Number 4 is journal. What happened if you're having trouble getting beyond grief? There's research that says just writing about it 15 minutes a day after a couple of weeks, significant improvement. The idea is do something. Number 5, be on an alert for an ant infestation. Those of you who follow my work, I talk about automatic negative thoughts, the thoughts that come into your mind automatically and ruin your day. And your brain is always listening. There's a big chapter on how to kill the ants that are feeding the dragons. Here's the exercise. Whenever you feel sad or mad or nervous or out of control, write down what you're thinking. And then ask yourself, is it true? Can I absolutely know if it's true? So helpful. 6 is deal with the triggers. Be on guard for them. And when they come, let the feeling wash over you. And then change it. You don't have to stay in sadness. And I have a new course coming out called Overcoming Anxiety, Depression, Trauma, and Grief, and talk about my friend Joseph McClendon, who has a 4-step process to break bad feelings quickly. Practice feeling bad. Like, go to the darkness. I feel the sadness over my dad. And then say, stop. Once you've dealt with it, but you don't, I call it interrupting unnecessary unhappy moments. Say stop. Stand up, take a breath, gives you some space, and then replace it with a happy moment. Like after I did one of my shows, my dad called me and said he was proud of me. And that was not a common thing. As accomplished as I am, expressing love was sort of rare. But I cherish that. I hold on to that. And then celebrate. It's like, yes, I don't have to feel bad. I can interrupt unnecessary, unhappy moments. Keep your memory balanced. Too often when we lose someone or something, we over-idealize them. I saw my grandmother do this to my grandfather. I loved my grandfather. I was named after him. He was my best friend when I was growing up. He was a candy maker. I was attached. But my grandmother was sort of mean to him. I wasn't a fan of her. And when my grandfather died, she just went on and on about how wonderful he was and how much she missed him. And I'm like, want to keep it balanced. And the bonus strategy, you're still struggling? Get help. Sometimes grief and loss can get stuck in your brain. So I've actually published scientific studies on how trauma gets stuck in the brain, and grief often becomes traumatic. And there are treatments that can help. Now, for me, I don't just reach for, take this or that medicine, but supplements like happy saffron or serotonin mood support can often be very helpful too. So I hope you're finding this helpful. Tuesday night, February 9th, 5 o'clock Pacific time, I am going to go live for 90 minutes. It's a special event. I'll put the link below. yourbrainisalwayslistening.com/event. And I'm going to take a deep dive into not only the dragons from the past, but the dragons as it relates to relationships and addictions and bad habits. I'm really excited. We're going to have a lot of fun. So sign up. You can also order my new book, Your Brain is Always Listening, if you go to yourbrainisalwayslistening.com. And if you pre-order it, I'm actually giving away a free bottle of Happy Saffron, along with some other wonderful gifts. So I hope you have a great night. If you're struggling with grief and loss, use some of these tips. I know they can be helpful to you. Take care.